Welcome back to Workshop Wednesday. I'm Chelsea Busmeyer. Thanks for joining me today in my workshop, and today we get to create a shawl collar pattern together. So I'm going to draft the pattern, show you how you can make a shawl collar pattern for any type of garment that you might want to add a collar to. For me here, it's fall and it's getting a little chillier, and I like to have a little something kind of around my neck, keep the drafts off. And I just made this kimono for myself recently, and I'd like to add a shawl collar to it. And if you like kimonos, if you want to learn more about fitting garments and drafting patterns, then don't miss my kimono class. I'm hosting it next week. I'll put the link to sign up for that in the description box. If you missed the class and you're watching this video after it's already over, then leave me a comment in the comment box below as well, and let me know that you want a kimono class, and I'll try and get another one together in the future and let you know about that. So in that class, we're actually going to be taking our body's measurements and then drafting a pattern for your own perfect kimono. So this is going to fit you physically, proportionally, and be exactly to your own personal preference and fit and style. And those are the keys to garment fitting. So if you're wondering how you can sew garments that better fit your body, this is a great practical class where you can learn how to apply the 3 pillars of fit, as I call them, and as I teach my students wherever you are, if you are in a one-off class or in my club membership or the fitting fashion program, that this is really the key to sewing garments that you love to wear. So you definitely don't want to miss that class. But here, when we're looking at this kimono or whatever garment that you want to make a collar for, the first measurement that you're going to need is the actual length of the collar. So we're going to cut this collar on the fold because we're just going to it's going to be a straight pattern. So we can easily cut it out on a fold, and we're going to set that fold right at the center back and then measure down wherever you want your collar to end. So on this kimono, I want the collar to come all the way down actually to this corner point where the hem is. You can have a collar end wherever you like. It can end higher up, even above the bust, just come around the neck. You can have it kind of end at your waist. Wherever you'd like your collar to end, you need just the full length measurement before you get started with drafting your pattern. So I'm just going to measure on the mannequin today. Typically I would just lay the garment on my table and measure it when I have it folded center back. I have a pin here so I know exactly where my center back is, so I can just measure the exact stitch line of where this collar is going to attach. I'm going to measure it down, and I'm going to use centimeters. I love sewing with centimeters just because they divide by 10, they're easy to divide, and they're smaller, so you don't have to use fractions as often. So the full length that I want to use for my collar is 76 centimeters. So the next thing I want to know is how wide do you want your collar to be? And I'm actually using this super nice soft drapey black jersey. So this is a single jersey. It's actually a bamboo rayon, so it's so soft, and it's going to be so nice and cozy around my neck. This material actually is more of a crepe, and it's a woven fabric. So if you've ever asked, can I sew a garment with both woven and knit together? Yes, you most definitely can. Just be aware of what the differences are. So here, the main difference is this fabric has way more stretch to it. Since it's just a collar, it's not really a big deal, but I will need to make sure that when I stitch it together, that I'm not stretching out this knit fabric. Otherwise, I might have a little extra collar at the end of my seam, and it might kind of want to pucker and bunch up. But for now, I'm just going to drape the corner. It has a little bit of a cut edge because I've cut something out of this piece, so it's a little bit of a narrower piece. I'm going to kind of see how much bulk do I want, how much fullness do I want, so I can get an idea of how much width I want kind of at the top of the neck. And I think I'm going to go with a little bit more, just because this fabric does drape really close and kind of fine together. It's quite a thin jersey, just to make sure that it doesn't end up being too skinny. And I can also trim it down too if it ends up being too bulky. It's a little hard to make it wider. So I'm going to go with, let me just give a quick measure to this and see around about the width that we're going to go with today. So I think I'm going to do like a full, maybe 18 centimeters wide. as the width. Okay, well, let's take this over to the table and see what our pattern would look like. So here I have my drafting paper, and today I have some beautiful sunshine outside, so I've got some funky shadows on my table, so they are not too distracting, but it is definitely a lovely fall day outside. I'm going to use this straight edge of my paper for the edge of my pattern piece where it attaches to my collar, just because it's already nice and 100% straight, and so I can just save some paper that way. So I'm going to calculate the distance of my collar with the seam allowance already attached, just since I can't add it on after the fact. For the width of my collar, we said an 18 centimeter, and then I'm going to attach it to the actual garment with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And the outside edge, I'm just going to leave raw, just because on this jersey it doesn't fray at all, and it just will blend in and kind of just roll under and into the fold. So I'm going to leave it raw rather than stitching it. It'll just get a little bit hard and stiff, and I don't want to see the stitch. Even if I did use the cover stitch, I would see the inside where it's folded over. So I think it will be less intrusive to just leave it raw. So my total collar width is going to be 19 centimeters. And I'm just going to start by drawing a really nice squared off edge for my center back of my collar. So flip it over and then draw this nice squared off edge out to my full collar length at 19 centimeters. And this is going to be the center back, and this is going to be cut on a fold. Next, I'm going to draw down from there. So keeping at the 19 centimeters, I'm just going to double check that I haven't skewed it at all as it comes down, since I can a little bit wide. Don't want to get wider. So we're going to bring this down also at a right angle from this point. So collars can be created as square and in a right angle, or in a curve. So when we create a curved collar, the edge, the outside edge that's laying on the shoulder is getting longer compared to the stitch line. And that will help your collar to lay flat. If you want your collar to spread and lay like a shawl collar that lays flat over your shoulder and then down, then you would want a curve. In this case, because I want it to kind of bunch up and come high on the back of my neck, I don't want any extra length as it goes around my neck. So that's why I'm cutting it squared off. So that, depending on the type of collar you want to create, you might need to create a different shape, but this is the shape that we need for the collar that I would like to have on my kimono here. So next we need to go down and see how much extra length we need to get to the actual full 76 centimeter length, because I'm not finishing the outer edge and I'm also cutting it on a fold. I don't need to add any seam allowance to the length of my collar today. Just gonna measure down and mark on here. Here's my 76 in length. But as I come down to the bottom, I'm gonna start right here with a bit of a right angle at exactly that length. But as I come down to this bottom, I want to actually taper my collar. So you could have a square edge on your collar. And I've actually seen this, it was really cute, where someone took a sweater and added a shawl collar just by stitching a square or rectangular scarf to the edge of the sweater. But in this case, I want the edge to taper off. If you had it a shorter length, then you'd be tapering off quicker. And you can taper off in any shape as well. If you wanted an angular taper, or a very soft or curve, or a very sharp kind of curve just at the bottom. Whoa, just jiggle my camera there. Sorry about that. Whatever shape it is that you want to create, just go for it. You just want to make sure that you have a little bit of a right angle for your seam allowance. However, at the very tip. However quickly you taper in at the bottom, doesn't matter, but you'll want to have at least at 1 centimeter just at a right angle from the edge with your seam allowance. I think I'm going to actually grab out my curved ruler. This is to help me with arm size and that type of thing. I think I want to have more of a rounded, shorter transition. Maybe I'll start with a longer one higher up and then blend it out with that. So I just want to make sure that I have my curved ruler laid on, that I can connect really smoothly with my straight line and start bringing it into a curve. And then same thing where I blend it out. I want it to be a nice smooth transition wherever that transition happens. I think I'm going to follow this line. So this is the curve that I want my collar to have. I'm excited to get this on and see how it looks. Just going to smooth this out. I think I'm actually going to blend out this corner. I might want to have some width though at the bottom. So I'm going to blend it out a little bit softer, but not a whole lot softer, so that my collar doesn't get too terribly skinny at the bottom. And these are all style design details, so these are flexible for any kind of design that you want to make. What is it that you want on this particular garment, and create the garment to match those ideals, and then you'll have your garment exactly the way that you want it. The style details can vary so much depending on the person and what it is that you really like. But I'm just going to go ahead and cut out this collar, and it's ready actually to lay on my fabric. Depending on the material you want to cut your collar out of, you might want to change the grain line if you have a pattern. And grain line is one of those things too that you need to pick the direction that best suits the fabric that you're using for the garment that you want to create. I'm going to get some extra stuff off my table, a little loud there, and take a look at our finished pattern here. So for the pattern or the garment and the fabric that I'm using, I'm going to use the grain line just straight in the garment. So my grain line is actually going to be parallel to this stitch line where it attaches. So this straight edge that I have. If you're using woven fabric, then it might be nice to do a bias cut, which is exactly at a 45-degree angle to this straight line would be your grain line, to do a complete bias cut collar. But for this fabric, because it has the stretch to it already and the way that it drapes, I think a true straight grain line in the length of the garment, or the pattern piece rather, and the length of the pattern piece would be best suited for my project. So I'm using a little scrap piece of black fabric, so it's a little bit funky in the shape, but I've got it laid out so that it's on the fold. The grain line is running lengthwise through the fabric and through the pattern, how I have it laid on. Got my pattern piece set in place, my adorable little mason jar pattern weights that my sister made me, holding my pattern piece in place. And I'm just going to cut it out to this full shape of my pattern. And we're just going to chat real quick here about the difference in the sewing variables, or the things that will adjust depending on your project, depending on the fabric that you're using, and how we can align them. For this particular project, if you follow me at all, you've probably heard me talk about sewing variables and the importance of aligning those sewing variables. And especially in a project like this, where we're mixing woven and knit fabrics, it might seem a little bit tricky to figure out, okay, which fabric should I follow? What kind of stitch should I use? Which kind of needle? And so when it comes to putting this collar on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a needle, a ballpoint needle, a needle that's intended for knits, for jersey fabrics, because I don't want to kind of rip or wreck the fabric at all by poking holes or breaking the threads in the knit. That's the reason why you need a knit needle. So the knit needle in a woven fabric, it just might not create such a straight, clean seam. If I was gonna top stitch my woven fabric, I definitely would want to use a regular sharp point to top stitch it so that it would be a nice clean straight edge. But for attaching the collar, you're not really gonna see the stitching on the woven fabric at all, so it's definitely safer to align that variable with my knit fabric. Now when it comes to the stitch, I'm going to use a regular lock stitch to sew this on, because since I'm attaching this knit material that has lots of stretch to a woven fabric that doesn't have stretch, I don't have to worry about the seam stretching out and that thread breaking. The reason you need like an overlock stitch or a stitch intended for knit fabrics is because when the fabric stretches and the seam doesn't, your thread will break. And you don't want your garments unraveling, especially when you're trying to wear them. So matching up the stitch that I'm using to the woven fabric works in this scenario, because that woven fabric is kind of going to work like an interfacing or a stabilizer, in that it will keep the knit fabric from stretching or overstretching the seam and breaking it. So we're going to use a knit needle, we're going to use a regular lock stitch, a regular straight stitch to stitch it on to the garment, and I'm just going to leave the outer edge raw. I'm going to go press it real quick in between since my fabric's looking a little wrinkly, and then attach it to my kimono. The last sewing variable that we want to address here before we get started is which way around the fabric is going to go and what type of seam I'm going to use to actually close it. So because I originally wasn't going to put a collar on this kimono, I've already finished off the edge with a little rolled hem. And I'm going to leave this closed just because the woven fabric here would fray if I opened it up. Another option would be a really nice option would be to do a French seam here. However, you'd want the French seam to be on the top side of your woven fabric so that it would be underneath the collar on the back side, so that on the inside of the garment we just have a smooth transition from the woven fabric to the collar, because our collar is going to fold over. It's going to cover up that French seam, and in my case it's going to cover up this little rolled edge and the seam allowance from the the knit fabric. So the seam allowance from the knit fabric and this rolled edge. Now where I'm going to stitch this knit fabric on, or the collar itself on, is going to be on the back side. I'm going to line it up, my seam allowance, so that I have it hanging over at 1 centimeter, and then I'm going to stitch just right next to my rolled hem on the inside. Actually, I'm going to slide it in a tiny bit so that the cut edge is lined up with the folded edge of my rolled hem. And then when I stitch just on the inside, missing my rolled hem, I'll have that extra length so that the material can double back, and that will deduct my full centimeter seam allowance, and then my collar can fold around this edge, so I'll have a nice rounded edge, nice rounded black collar edge, and go around to the front where it will be right side out. So the way that I want this fabric to attach is a little bit counterintuitive. When you're attaching collars, this is the most common because it's folding over. You don't put the right sides together. I'm going to put the right side of my collar against the wrong side of my kimono, so that when I fold my collar around, the right side of the fabric is laying facing out, and it's laying on top of the outside of my kimono, which is also the right side of the fabric. So we want both of the backs to be at the back when the collar is flipped around. So you don't want to put right side and right side together. In the case of a collar, you almost always put them kind of backwards, or the same, I guess, in that you have both of the fabrics laying in the right direction, but you have a wrong side against a right side when you're stitching it together so that when you flip it around, you have both right sides facing outward. Switched out my mannequin and my top here quick so we didn't have black on black with the video. Black is hard enough to see, but now you can see how the collar drapes. We can flip it around and see how it's laying on the back of the neck. Here is where our kimono ends and here's our seam, but the collar folds down over top. So this is a great kind of visual again. We have the right side of the fabric on the outside, and then here we have the wrong side, and then the same with the kimono, the right side, and then on the inside, of course, the wrong side. So here where it transitions, we have the right side transitioning into the wrong side so that when we fold our collar over, you're actually seeing the right side of the fabric here. And you can see my little seam allowance underneath. So when the collar is laying on top, it covers up that seam allowance, and it's just a nice smooth transition for if your jacket kind of opens up and people see on the inside, then it's just nice and clean. If you did have your collar like folded all the way in, you might see the seam allowance. So definitely align those sewing variables to best suit your project and how your project is gonna wear, sit, hang, flow. And for this jacket, I think having that seam allowance on the inside, it comes down nice, as well as I have a little bit of extra length to kind of come up on the back of my neck if I feel like it for the winter. Keep those chills off. And I really like to how this tapers down here at the hem and transitions into my little fringy bottom. I can spread it out a little bit wider and have a little bit more fullness or a little bit more black in the front, or bunch it up and just let it hang really nice and straight down the bottom. So I'm gonna just try it on now and see what it looks like, how it feels on. And that's really as easy as a shawl collar is. It's so easy. You just really need that stitch line length, where you want it to attach, where you want it to blend out. This jacket would actually be super cute with a shorter collar too. If I had it just end a little higher, it would almost have more of a kind of a blazer effect. Put a button on it. So maybe my next kimono will be like that. But I do like the extra length of the full jersey. It's so soft. That bamboo, right? It's just such a soft jersey. I'm just looking at how it's draping and hanging. So that's your shawl collar. Thanks for joining me so much on this episode of Workshop Wednesday. Do you have something you want to put a shawl collar on? Now you know how to do it. Now you know how to draft it. And if you want to make your very own kimono, then don't forget to click on the link and sign up for my class next week. I look forward to seeing you in class and next week on Workshop Wednesday.